All right, so I was saying before I started the recording, for those of you who weren't in the room just now, as I write the new homeworks, I'm recording videos to go along with them, where I actually work through the problems. So if you get jammed up and you're like, I don't understand what I'm supposed to do, you have access to the video. So I just posted chapters 5 and 6 yesterday, so you have those. Those are due next week. I think I pushed them out to like Monday night, just because I'm not 100% sure I'll get through 6 by Wednesday. So that's available to you. Has anybody used them yet? Looked at them? You've seen them? Okay. All right. So they're working. Mostly I want to know that you're able to access them. All right. I'm also obviously recording because we've had a number of students with various issues. So that wasn't my plan at the beginning of the semester, but we'll do it for now. So you'll have access to this video. I'm not going to make any guarantees that the videos are perfect. And I did something for finance and I forgot to switch to the, to the view. So whoever, at the end, you're watching, all you're seeing is this white screen while I talk. So we'll do what we can. All right. Hey, how many of you came out to, I saw a few of you, like I think I saw Linda and maybe Emma were you there, Linda, or am I imagining? Yeah, okay. Okay, I thought, yeah, there was a few of you who came out and you came too, Kate. All right, and yeah, great. Okay, fabulous. So guys had a good turnout. It was really, I was only there at the very beginning for the bake sale on Friday. They raised almost $500. Y'all raised almost $500, which is awesome. We're going to use that money for stuff like the event we had at the beginning of the year. We're going to use it we're going to be doing a Boston Day, which is we're going to get a bus and we're going to go down to Boston, and some of the alumni will work they set up a kind of a little mini conference where you get to meet alumni that work in Boston. They come talk to you about careers and stuff, and you can do some networking. And it's always a great thing. But we use that money to pay for the bus, and the bus costs like $900 or something like that. So that's where that money goes. It's all for you guys. All right, so we're going to finish up chapters, kind of circling back to chapter 3, some of the stuff I want to talk about that we didn't talk about. So going back, price, quantity, right? We need to understand these things. So if we have a demand curve, right, downward sloping, it's going to have the form of P equals A minus BQ, and I'm using B there instead of M for slope, but the B is the slope. And in this case, it's a negative slope. I'm using B because M would kind of maybe imply M could be positive or negative. So I'm just with a demand curve, it's always going to have a negative slope. It's always going to slope downward. Why is it always going to slope downward? Because as prices get lower, we want more of stuff, right? If a Mac was cheaper, right, meaning a lower price, there'd be more people buying Macs and fewer people buying Windows machines because Macs are better, even though I use a Windows machine myself, just because I'm used to them. But, that's a higher quality product. If it was a lower price, you'd see more people running around with Macs, right? You could think about, if the price of a Tesla was lower, more people would buy more Teslas. Like, this is kind of common sense, and people just get all anxious when they see this downward sloping demand curve. But that's all that's saying, right? Is as price goes down, we want more stuff. That's basically, in English what this means, right? Now, the A here is the P-intercept. So that's the number or the price where that's kind of the upper limit of the price where nobody's going to want anything at price A. Right? That gets us to zero quantity. But that's where it starts. And so whenever we draw this graph, right? So like when I tell you draw the demand curve, and I give you something like P equals 10 minus 2Q, something like that as an example, right? When you go to draw the demand curve, the first thing you should be doing is saying, okay, I know that this line is going to cross both the Y and X axes. The easiest thing to get is the Y-intercept, which is the A, right? And all I have to do that is to set Q equal to 0. So if I set Q equal to 0, meaning the X-axis is 0, so I know I'm here. If I set Q equal to 0, I've got minus 2 times 0, that's 0. So that leaves me with 10. So I immediately know the Y-intercept is 10, right? And then given the slope, if it's minus 2, then this line is going to go down at minus 2. So I can look at that and say, well, at a Q of 5, minus 2 times 5 is minus 10. 10 minus 10 is 0. So I know at a Q of 5, the demand curve is going to cross, right, at 5. So where A, if this is 10, right? So we know that. Okay. This equation, 10 minus 2Q, or in the more general form, P equals A minus BQ. And I realized I used to call it, when I was going through my PhD program, I used to call that alphabet math, right? But there's a purpose to that. Right? It allows us to think more generally. If I throw something at you that's alphabet math, like P equals A minus BQ, feel free to plug numbers in, right? If it'll help you make more sense of it, like I just did, 10 minus 2Q. Right? If that'll help you kind of process, feel free to drop those numbers in. I will generally do a real example with real numbers because I realize that the alphabet math gets, kind of sometimes can get in the way if you're not used to it. Here's the main point I'm trying to make. That A, right, that P-intercept captures a certain state of the world. Right? So the relationship P equals 10 minus 2Q exists it is true as long as, well, what it's doing is it's relating price. Let's say the price of a cup of coffee, right, and the quantity of cups of coffee that we might want. And so at a price of $10, nobody wants coffee. They'll do something else. But at a price of 8, there'll be one person that wants a cup of coffee. At a price of 6, we'll have 2. At a price of 4, we'll have 3, right, and on down the line. Well, that's true if everything except price and quantity are held constant. So you may have heard the phrase ceteris paribus, all other things equal, right, is what, or you probably heard somebody say, well, all other things equal, I'd want X, Y, or Z, right? That's what this is saying is, we're holding all the other facts around constant, then P equals 10 minus 2Q is true. So let's say that's for coffee. Let's say that's for Dunkin' Donuts coffee, right? Well, what could change such that that relationship, maybe the slope stays the same, but instead of starting at 10 and rolling down to up to 5 cups of coffee, it shifts down. And when I say shifts down, I also mean shifts left, but I'll say down for now. Use a different color. So that maybe instead of it being 10, it's now 8. Well, what would that imply? So if now we have P2, so P1 was that, right? So this is D1, this is D2. So D1, D2 is equal to 8 minus 2Q. So now we know it crosses the y-axis at 8 and the x-axis at 4. What does this mean? Well, at a price of, say, 4, right? At a price of 4, how many cups of coffee did we used to want to have? Well, at a price of 4, we say P4 equals 10 minus 2Q, right? Subtract 4, we get 6 equals 2Q, and we get Q equals 3. So under the original demand curve, D1, at a price of 4, we wanted 3 cups of coffee. Under the new demand curve, D2, at a price of 4, right? 4 equals 8 minus 2q. Now we've got 4 equals 2q, q equals 2. Same price, right? Price hasn't changed, but now we have a different relationship because we've shifted the whole line down, right? We've moved the p-intercept down from 10 to 8. And so therefore, at all prices, right, I could redraw this line higher up. I could redraw it at 6. And then it'll be messy here, but at 6, we originally wanted 3 cups. At 6, we would have wanted 2 cups of coffee. At 6 now, we want 1 cup of coffee. Under D2, under the changed quantity, we want 1 cup of coffee. So actually, that lines up pretty well. Yeah. So, right. So if we track over to the new demand curve, we only want 1 cup of coffee. So something is causing us to want less coffee at the same price. So it used to be at 6, we'd go buy 2 cups of coffee. Then something happens, and at 6, we only want 1 cup of coffee, right? So this is called a shift of the demand curve. The whole curve moves in or down, or it can also move out. I mean, the other thing we could draw is it going out instead. So instead of shifting from here in, I could also draw it going out. So what we're going to talk about for the first portion of this class today is what makes that happen? What would change it so that at a price of, at a price of 2, we used to want 4 cups of coffee. Right, we'd go buy 4 cups of coffee. So the price of 2 we used to go, and 2 is about what, like Starbucks charges for like a basic black coffee, right? Basic black coffee. I was just at a meeting and snitched this on the way out. So, so what would make us all of a sudden want to buy less? Well, that original D1 line assumes a whole bunch of facts. Number 1 is we have some level of income, right? So that's the number 1 demand shifter. If we've got some level of income, let's say you're working a part-time job, you're making $50 a week, which you can use to, buy some food and some beer and some, and some coffee, right? So you're making that $50 a week. And so under that, when you're making that amount of money, when the coffee is $2 a cup, you want 4 cups. Now what happens? Well, it turns out that Professor Bonica's classes are a real pain in the rear, and it turns out you can't work as many hours as you've been working before, right? And so you're going to have to stay home and study economics on Friday night instead of going to work a shift at Scorps or wherever it is you guys work. And so now you have less income. So now the world has changed, right? The price, right? The relationship between price and quantity hasn't changed. What's changed is the amount of income that you have. And so because you have less income, you can't buy as many cups of coffee. You can no longer afford to buy as many cups of coffee as you once did. And so that represents a left shift or a downward shift of the demand curve, such that with a reduced level of income, your demand at all prices is now lower. That's what a left shift or a downward shift of the demand curve represents. If I change my income, if I reduce my income, it's going to shift my demand curve into the left. And the way that we do that is we change the value of the intercept, right? So A was 10, now it's 8. And then we draw a parallel line, right? These are parallel lines. That's what those 2 little hash marks mean, is those 2 lines are parallel. So even if I'm not drawing it especially well, you're supposed to imagine that the 2 of them are exactly parallel, because they still have. How do you know that they're parallel mathematically? So even though we've changed the intercept, what's still the same? the slope, right? So two lines with the same slope are going to be parallel. So that's just kind of geometry. That's 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th, whatever it was, whenever you took geometry, right? Two lines with the same slope are parallel. So a decrease in income reduces your ability to buy goods at all prices, regardless of the price. So the price-quantity relationship hasn't changed. What's changed is your ability to buy. So that's number one demand shifter, is income. Okay, income goes down, then the demand curve goes down, right? Income goes up, the demand curve goes up. So if I get more income, then I'll go out to D3. So now I get a better job, pays, instead of making 10 bucks an hour, I'm making $15 an hour. I can work the same number of hours, but I have more income. Now my demand curve shifts out. I'm buying coffee from my friends. I'm buying coffee, just so I can carry it around and look cool. That's when I've got more income, I want more coffee at all prices. When I have less income, I want to buy less coffee at all prices. And substitute in any good that you want: iPhones, beer, medical services. Poor people can't buy as much healthcare as rich people can, right? That's just a fact. Okay, so number one is demand is changes in income will shift the demand curve. If income goes down, the demand curve goes down. If income goes up, the demand curve shifts out. So, for example, China as a country has become far wealthier in the last 20 years than it ever has been. Enormous growth in wealth. It's an amazing accomplishment. And their population is demanding stuff that they've never been able to afford before. More of the population can afford to eat meat. Now, this is not something that we typically think of in the United States as a thing, because we're really rich as a country. China historically has had people at the edge of starvation for much of my lifetime. Right? It's only recently that most Chinese people have enough money to be able to reliably be food secure, meaning they know where their next meal is coming from. And that has resulted in the demand curve for almost everything in China shifting to the right. Right? There's a huge increase in the amount of pork, for example, that Chinese people want to consume. That's because that was a luxury good that they couldn't afford when they were poor. So their demand curve for pork shifted out to the right, or up, if we want to think about it in terms of the p-intercept, right? So their p-intercept went from, say, 10 up to 12 for pork. And I'm just making up an arbitrary number there, but the point would be, if you increase the p-intercept from 10 up to 12, the result would be the line would now be drawn from 12 down at a slope of -2 instead of at 10 down at a slope of -2, right? Okay, so that's your first demand shifter. Second one is population. So some of the examples you're going to see in the at least one of the examples in the homework talks about population. If population goes up, so now if we're not looking at this as an individual demand curve, but as a society or a market demand curve, so we're not counting like just Allie's demand for coffee, but now like we're talking about the demand in Durham for coffee, right? If more people move to Durham, there'll be more people going to Dunks to buy coffee. The result will be a right shift or an upshift of the demand curve. When there's more people in the market, more people want stuff. What happens is it's a right or upshift of the market. So when the population gets bigger, then the demand curve shifts up. So let's say all of a sudden we brought it, UNH somehow magically grew by, we currently have like 12,000 students. Let's say we somehow magically grew to 14,000 students. That's a non-trivial increase in the number of students, right? That'd be like a 15% increase. Suddenly, there'd be a lot more, people standing in line at the MUB in front of you trying to get dunks when you were used to being able to kind of cruise in there and pick up your coffee. Now all of a sudden there's all these new faces hanging around, right? So that would be right. An increase in population results in an increase in the demand for services. When my wife and I first moved, we moved to Texas after I finished my PhD. We moved down to San Antonio. We bought a house in an outlying community just outside a suburb of San Antonio called Cibolo. In the late 90s, so this was 2010 when we moved there. In the late 90s, Cibolo had like a population of something like 2,000. The cows outnumbered the number of people that lived there. By the time we moved there, they had a pretty major building boom. It was very much a bedroom community. There were about 20,000 people that lived in Cibolo when we moved there. And what was happening when we moved, and that had been relatively recent, like in the 5 to 7 years prior to us moving in, there had been all these people that had been crowding in. Well, what happened? Huge shift to the right in terms of demand for all the things that you need in your normal life. Like this was literally like I used to go for a run when I first moved there, and I would run by fields with cows in them, the big Texas cows with the horns. Like those are real. That's not just like a picture in a cartoon. These big longhorns, be out in fields. And we lived off this street called this kind of major 4-lane road. It wasn't a highway, but it was like a 4-lane road called Borgfeld. And it was mostly empty when we first moved there. Down the end that was close to 35, it had like a big strip mall with like a big grocery store, and there was a little farther down was a Walmart, but like Borgfeld basically had like nothing on it. And over the 5 years that we lived there, that just started popping up. More and more stuff kind of started popping up, and and the things that started popping up, there were like, by the time we moved, there were like 5 dentist offices on Borgfeld, like this like 2-mile strip. There were like 5 more dental offices. Why? Well, because back when Cibolo was 2,000 people, they might need 1 dentist. By the time it was up to 20,000, they needed about 10 dentists. And as it continued to grow, right, and actually probably when I moved there, when there were 20,000 people, there were probably only like 4 dentists. So there was a need for like 10, 5 or 6 more dental offices. And so they were starting to fill in. And then the town just kept on growing and getting bigger and bigger. And so the demand for dental offices moved out even more. So it kind of became a joke. We were like kind of hoping that maybe it'd be something interesting that was getting built. And almost every time it was a dental office. We were like, oh, another dental office. We don't need another dental office. Like, we're good. We got our dentist. Well, not everybody was good, because not everybody was able to have a dentist, because there weren't enough dentists, right? Because their demand curve for dentists was shifting out. Same with medical, right? All those just general needs. When you take planning in your senior year, you will talk about ratios for like number of dentists per 1,000 people in a community, and something like 1 per 2,000. You need 1 dentist for every 2,000 people in your community-ish, right? If you have more than that, they're going to be competing, and they're not going to be able to get enough patients to support their business. And you have ratios like that for OBGYNs, for primary care, obviously. Your average primary care person has a enrollment of somewhere around 1,500 to 2,000 patients. So if your town had 10,000 people and it grows to 20,000 people, and you only have 5 doctors, there's not going to be enough doctors to take care of to provide primary care. So you're going to have a shortage. And what's going to happen, if prices can flex, it'll get really expensive and people won't be able to afford the care. Okay. And the other thing that kept popping up were chicken places, like fried chicken places. And we were just like, my God, what's it going to be this time? It became a joke, because we'd be driving down and be at a new construction. We're like, all right, what's it going to be? A dental office or a chicken place? And, it was almost always one of the two. Ask my wife. It's all true. All right. So when population gets bigger, right, you have an increase in demand. Now, if you're from the North Country, like up in Berlin or areas like that, you guys are probably too young to remember it happening, but those towns used to have what? What were the big employers up in the North Country? Anybody from kind of northern New Hampshire, northern Maine, northern Vermont, and all of Vermont, basically northern. They used to have paper mills. That was like the main industry up in those towns. Why? Because the trees are there. That's so the trees. You bring the trees to the paper mill. If you have the paper mill near the trees, you have a shorter transportation difference, and so the trees would be brought into the paper mills. And everybody in the town used to work in the paper mill. When I was a kid, my dad paid for his medical school by getting a public health service scholarship. So when he was done, the public health service got to send him wherever they needed a brand new doctor. And so the place they decided to send him was this place called Bucksport, Maine. Anybody ever been to Bucksport? Penobscot River. It's beautiful, by the way. Definitely recommend it. It's about 3-ish hours. It's on the way to Bar Harbor. So if you go to Bar Harbor, you'll be near Bucksport. Cute town. Used to have a huge paper mill. When I lived there, it was still booming. Most of the adult men worked in the paper mill, or and they made good money. Good middle class incomes. Most of the you didn't have to have a college degree. You graduate from high school, and then they'd hire you, and you'd join the union, and they'd start you sweeping the floors, and then you'd move up and make more money over time. In fact, I had this conversation with one of the kids who lived next door to me. His dad worked in the mill. They had all the cool stuff. If you live in Maine, the cool stuff being a four-wheeler, guns, fast boat, right? They had all the cool stuff that life in Maine requires. So they lived quite well. And my friend, who was my age, went to elementary school with me. We talked about kind of this vague way that 10-year-olds talk. Well, what are you going to do when you grow up? I guess I'm going to go to college. I don't know. Maybe I'll be a doctor. Yeah, not so. But he said, well, why would I go to college? I'm just going to, get a job at the mill. They pay $6 an hour starting floats, sweeping the floor. Now, this was 1979. $6 an hour was a lot of money. More like $25 an hour today, right? So you can make $25 an hour sweeping the floor. Why would I go to college, right? And fast forward 20 years, the mill closes down, right? All those good middle-class jobs, gone in like a 6-month period, just gone. It's gone, right? Goodbye bass boat, right? Camper, four-wheeler, right? Can't afford that stuff anymore because what's left? There are no jobs. Like there aren't enough jobs for the men, let alone the women, to work. So what happens? People leave. People start leaving. What happens? Demand curve starts to shift to the left, right? There's a collapse in demand for everything. So the opposite effect of what we experienced in Texas. All right. Next demand shifter. Price of substitutes. I could buy a Dunk's coffee, or I could buy an Aroma Joe's coffee. They are substitutes, right? I mean, if you're not a hardcore, committed Dunk's drinker, where you're like, there's just no way I could possibly drink anything other than Dunk's, then okay, maybe we'll talk about that later. But for the most part, if Dunk's is closer, I'm walking to Dunk's. If Aroma Joe's is closer, I'm walking to Aroma Joe's. It's it doesn't make any difference to me. They are perfect substitutes in my mind. As is making my own coffee in my office, right? So so you can get more distant. What's another substitute for coffee? What else could you do? So I've got Dunk's and Aroma Joe's. That's a pretty close substitute. I've got a coffee maker in my office. That's a slightly farther substitute because now I have to make it myself. What's another substitute for coffee? Mm-hmm. Tea. Yeah, if you're just looking for a hot drink, tea is drank by most of the world. So coffee is actually less commonly drank, right? So tea is a good example of a substitute. What else? Energy drinks. What somebody said. Kate. Same thing. Energy drink.
Yeah.
Okay. Energy drink. Good. What else? How about a Coke? Diet Coke. I didn't start drinking coffee until I was on a regular basis until I was 37. I used to wake up in the morning, and the first thing I would open up is, well, back in the day when I was your age, I'd go to the dining hall and get like 4 Pepsis, right, in a line, and drink all those. And then eventually I got healthy and started drinking Diet Coke. So I'd be driving to work with my Diet Coke in my hand, right? My oatmeal cream pie from Little Debbie's. You know, don't come to me for health advice. But you know, when I was your age, I could eat anything and I wouldn't get fat. So I'm still working that out. Because it changes, trust me, when you get to be 50. It's not the same game. Enjoy it while you got it. But you know, so Diet Coke, substitute for me. That's what I drank. I used to drink like a 6-pack of Diet Coke every day. The start was like 1 or 2 in the morning, have a couple with lunch, you know, mid-afternoon, you know, pick me up, through dinner, have another one, go to bed. So that was a substitute. So there's lots of substitutes for coffee, right? That's the point. If the price, if let's say Dunks is charging $2.50 for a medium regular hot coffee, and Aroma Joe's is also charging $2.50 for a medium hot coffee, you're putting a difference between the two, right? That's not going to affect your, you know, you're going to go to one or the other. You know, again, it'll probably come more down to location rather than price. But what if this is the demand? So let's say D1, right? This is the demand for Dunks coffee at and at $2.50 you can get a medium hot coffee, and then Aroma Joe's cuts their price to $1.50. What do you think is going to happen to the demand for Dunks coffee if they keep their price at $2.50 and Aroma Joe's, you know, a block and a half away is charging $1.50? It's going to go down, right? People are going to be like, oh, $1.50 or $2.50. I'm a poor college student. I'm going across the street to get the $1.50, right? So when the price of substitutes goes down, right, your demand for your product goes down. So when the price of a substitute, a close substitute, or substitute in general for your product goes down, the demand for your product will go down. So from a medical perspective, what does that look like? Well, primary care used to be you'd go to see a doctor. You know, everybody went to see a family med doctor or a you know, internist or a pediatrician if you're taking your babies, right? What's a common substitute now in primary care for a physician? Nurse practitioner, good. What else? PA, right? Nurse practitioner and PA. Those are probably your 2 most common. They're close substitutes. Right? A nurse practitioner PA can handle 99% of primary care just as well as a family medicine doc or, you know, a full, you know, board trained primary care physician can. 99 might be a little high, 90, let's say 98, right? There's plenty of evidence that nurse practitioners on average are as good at handling primary care needs of patients as primary care physicians are. Plenty of evidence for that point. Same with PAs, right? It's that 2% that matters. So if you're a complex patient, you probably need to be seen by an internist or a family medicine doc. But, you know, most nurse practitioners can handle most patients just fine. So that's a close substitute. So as more nurse practitioners come into the market, what's going to happen to the demand curve for physicians, for primary care physicians? It's going to shift down, right? So what would happen if we were doing that here? We'd say, all right, the demand, the P-intercept for physicians was 10. Now it's going down to 8, right? It would be a left shift or a downward shift of the demand curve. Why? Because there are more substitutes coming into the market. Likewise, the opposite is also true. If the substitutes for your product go up in price, then the demand will shift to you from the demand for them, right? So, so you would see an increase in price if the price of substitutes. So this is, these are correlated. I should be saying that already, right? So the price of substitutes goes down, the demand for your services, price of substitutes goes down, the demand for your services goes down. So these are correlated. So all of these are correlated so far. Next category, price of complements. What's a complement? Well, complement, that's C-O-M-P-L-E-M-E-N-T-S, not C-O-M-P-L-I-M-E-N-T-S. What's the difference? Complement with an E is something that goes with something else. A complement is, I love your hair today. Right? That's the difference. Right? So it makes it's like people, nails on a chalkboard when I see a student write compliment like with an I, because it makes me all anxious. When you're not talking about saying something nice to someone, but in fact saying, complements are two things that go together. So like the Reese's peanut butter cup, right? The little commercial, two great tastes that go great together, right? That's classic. That is a classic description of complementary goods. You like chocolate, you like peanut butter, but you know what's even better? Chocolate and peanut butter together, right? And so what about in a medical scenario? Well, what's the demand for a hospital? Well, a hospital is just a building with some expensive equipment in it. What's a complement to a hospital? Doctors, it's a big fancy building, really expensive to build, and completely of no value unless there are doctors inside doing stuff, right? So physicians and hospitals are complementary goods. They work together in order to produce a product. So, if the price of a complementary good goes up, so let's say the price of physician care goes up, how will that affect the demand curve for hospitals? It will go down. Why would it go down? It's more expensive, right? Because you're buying a package here. You're not just buying the hospital. Again, the hospital by itself is of very little value. What you want is the combined package of a doctor and a hospital, because the two by themselves have much less value. Like, a hospital can do some stuff. Maybe there's some nurses who can help you out a little bit. But you really want a physician to make the decisions, to do the complicated procedures. Likewise, a physician, let's say, take like a cardiologist we were talking about previously, like my brother-in-law, the EP doc. He can do all this amazing stuff if he has an OR. But if he doesn't have an OR, you don't want him putting electrodes into your heart, because the OR has all the equipment that keeps it safe, gives him the visualization to be able to see where those electrodes are, because he sticks them in through your groin, by the way, and slides them up through your arteries into your heart valley. Sounds like, yeah, I don't want to do it either. But he needs some pretty significant equipment to make sure that he's not like sliding it down to your toe instead of up to your heart, because it's not going to do any good down to your toe. So if the price of a complement goes up, the complementary good goes up, and depending on, and there are degrees to which the complements are necessary for each other. Like, how much demand do you have for left shoes without right shoes? Like zero, right? Like, there's no value in having a left shoe and not a right shoe. I mean, some even like this, by looking at you, right? So you really don't want like just a left shoe. So those are, and again, like an electrophysiologist is almost worthless without a hospital. Almost, not quite worthless, but it's a nice guy to go. but other than that, like, he can't do what he's been trained to do unless he has a hospital. So if the price of physician services goes up, the demand for hospitals is gonna go down. Like, similarly, if the price of hospital services goes up, the demand for hospital-based providers is gonna go down. So now you have an opposite direction relationship. So if the price of a complement goes up, let's see, price, demand, price, demand, price, demand, price, demand. Right, so we now have an opposite direction effect. So if we're here at D1, and that's the demand for hospital services, and the cost of physician services goes up, physician services are a complement, the demand for hospital services is going to go down. All right. Next, expectations. Okay. How about expectations? What do expectations have to do with my demand? How many of you guys are waiting on the edge of your seat to find out if that President Biden's $10,000 in debt relief is going to actually come through for you guys? I'm like going to take out, so like my first reaction was, how do I get some student loans, right? Because I don't have it. And more to the point, how do I get my kids some student loans? Because I've been paying out of pocket for my kids' education, and they don't have any loans. So now I feel a bit like a chump if that actually comes through, and and a bunch of people with that. And God bless if you're all waiting on it. I wish you well. I hope you get some, but it really pisses me off, right? But my immediate reaction was, how do I get some, right? So if I have an expectation of being able to get that debt relief, what am I going to do? I'm going to go out and try to get some debt so that I can get it relieved, right? So I can go buy the Tesla that I've not been buying, right? So I can take out a student loan or something and use it to buy whatever. I don't know. Maybe I'll go back to school and learn flower arranging. So when expectations about what's going to happen in the future, when we have expectations about the future, they affect our current demand for things. So for example, if you believed that car prices, if you knew in advance, right, that car prices were going to shoot up in 2020 and 2021, whenever it was, they really took off because of COVID, as we work through our existing inventory and suddenly realized, oh wow, we can't get chips from Taiwan because everybody in Taiwan's got COVID. And basically a new car is a computer on four wheels, and unless you get the chips, you can't finish making these cars, right? Car I used to drive when I was a kid was like this piece of crap that didn't have anything in it, but it was great because it had steel bumpers, like hard metal, and we used to play bumper tag. We'd drive up behind each other and kind of go like 10 miles an hour. You'd like run into your buddy. Today, if you did that, you'd have like a $10,000 repair bill, 10-mile-an-hour crash. Anyway, so if I knew in 2020 that prices for cars are going to shoot up 30%, I would probably buy a car today, right? I would have bought it in 2020 in advance of this expected increase in price. Likewise, if you were like, if you hear Apple is coming out with a new iPhone, right? And they're going to come out with a new iPhone in December. And you're in the market, you're like, well, my old iPhone, it's like at least a year old. I really need a new one. And the new iPhone is coming out. Are you going to go ahead and buy a new iPhone now? Or are you going to wait for the new iPhone to come out? You're going to wait, right? I mean, it is a long time to wait, 6 months for a new phone. I realize for many. But you can't. And you probably would if you knew that this better product was going to be available at some time in the near future. So what happens then? So let's talk about that, right? So I have this current demand, right, for say, it has to be something that you can delay purchasing. So maybe I want, I'm thinking about buying a fitness track. People wearing those anymore? Everybody's kind of got like a fad, it's gone. Some people wear it. Yeah, maybe. Or, I mean, everybody had one for a while, and it seems like maybe it's died down a little bit. Your step counter, things like that. Let's say, I'm interested in fitness tracker, demand today for that, and then I find out that the prices tomorrow are going to be lower, right? Or they're going to have a new model or something. So prices are going to be lower, or there'll be more of them. So then the prices will be lower. What's going to happen? So let's say, current demand here. If I find out my demand for a fitness tracker today versus tomorrow, if I find out that there's going to be a much better version available to me tomorrow, and I'm using tomorrow for some future date, not necessarily literally tomorrow, what's going to happen to my demand? Well, I'm not going to buy the thing today, right? I'm going to delay. So if I have an expectation that there'll be better quality, lower price, whatever in the future, then my demand today will go down, and my demand in the future, that should be D2, let's say D1, D2, D1 will shift out. So my demand in the future will shift out. My demand today, right, will shift to the left. If you have the ability to shift in time. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. So expectations. And likewise, if I think that it's going to get really expensive, like I was saying with the cars, if I think that the thing that I really want is going to get really expensive tomorrow, I'll buy it today. So then the pattern reverses. I wind up with wanting more today, and my demand, I shift my demand for future consumption into the present. Right, so that's expectations. And last is tastes. You guys watch the Super Bowl ever? Some of you? Yeah, Sean does. Okay. Yeah. So have you watched the Super Bowl at least once in your life? I'm not a huge football fan. The thing that I watch the Super Bowl for are the ads. I love the ads. They're hilarious, right? So and companies know that. They put millions of dollars into making these great ads. Like I remember there was the one for Hyundai was awesome. It was Hyundai's such a piece of junk car, but I had one. It was terrible. But they made this cute, like the Hyundai Soul. It's like a boxy looking car. So when that thing first came out, it was like maybe 2011-ish. Was it? Is it a Kia Soul? Maybe it was Kia, not Hyundai. I had a Kia, I actually like my Kia. Then my middle daughter crashed. Anyway, all right, maybe it was a Kia Soul. And like it was like they had these gerbils driving the Kias, and they were like driving through like a robot battleground. Do you remember this, Molly? You know this? You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, right. And they had like all these robots fighting, and the little gerbils were driving. It was completely like, what the hell? But it was hilarious. And then the gerbils like jumped out and they're all dancing, and the robots all kind of go, and then the robots all start dancing, and everybody's happy because it's a Kia Soul. Of course, we're all happy. Like it brings world peace, and everybody's going to dance. Need to send some over to Ukraine, right? So what does that do? Like that fills me with this like warm, fuzzy feeling for Kia, right? And then I want to go buy more Kia Souls, right? So now, like I look, whenever I see a Kia Soul on the street, I see it and I think of the dancing gerbils and the dancing robots and world peace, and I'm like, what a great little car, right? And it's only $995, right? So that's also a benefit, dirt cheap. So what is the goal of advertising? it's not to spend money and make cute shows. I mean, that's actually one of the downsides. Like advertisers will get ad agencies will get beat up by the companies that hire them because they're like, you made a cute show, but it didn't make anybody want to buy our stuff, right? And so you guys remember the World's Most Interesting Man series? It was like was it Michelob or something? Oh no, Corona. It was like this 60-ish year old Hispanic looking dude with like a cool looking beard. He just looks like this really smart, wealthy dude. And he's drinking. You remember what beer was it? It was Mick Ultra. All right, so it's like and he'd be like, and he turned into a meme. Like there's all these like memes about it from a few years back, and there was the whole campaign was built around this one guy. And what Michelob realized at some point was the Most Interesting Man image had like become disconnected from Michelob, and it wasn't like at first it was really successful in getting people to think about Michelob, but then eventually everybody was more interested in what were they having the Most Interesting Man do these days, and they kind of lost the benefit, so it stopped making people feel better about Michelob and just kind of became this vague thing. So that's the risk. That's an interesting problem. But what is the goal of advertising? It's to make you feel better, right? At least a piece of it is to make you feel better about the product so that you want more of it at any given price. So you shift to the right. So like the Kia Soul, ad with the dancing robots made me feel better about Kia. Actually had a Kia at one point, but I think I bought it before the dancing robots. So that didn't do any good for me, but it still made me feel good about the brand, even though I thought it was Hyundai until you guys corrected me. So that was a long time ago. So one of the main goals of advertising is to change your feelings, your tastes about a product. It's also to inform you. Like if you don't see an ad about a product, you may not know anything about the product. You may not realize that you really, really need whatever that product is. Right? So you see an ad for laser hair removal, and you're like, I've never thought about having the hair that started coming out of the tip of my nose, for example, when I was 40. I've never really thought about getting laser hair removal done. And then my wife's like, hey, I found an ad for laser hair removal, and they're offering 2 for 1. We could go together, and you could get the hair on your nose taken off. Man, I tell you what, that was fun. I don't know if Jenny, you have that. That was an unpleasant feeling. I had these hairs like growing out of the tip of my nose, and and now I'm shaving the tip of my nose, which is like a thing that I never imagined I would have to do. And I went for the laser. I have to tell you, like it's just like this little light, and it goes zip, zip. And when it went zip zip, it felt like somebody punched me in the face every time they did it. Because it was right on the tip of my if something happens to the tip of your nose, it's like it's way like do it to my arm. You could do it all day long. The tip of my nose, it's a whole other game. And I remember the technician's like, "You're a little bit of a wimp, aren't you?" And I'm like, "It's my nose. What can I say?" But we never would have gone and done that, right, if we hadn't known about it. So advertising is more than just about taste, but that's an important part of it, is changing of tastes. Okay, so those are the 6 demand shifters. And coming back to what I was saying, they're shifters. They shift the line. They are not movements along the line, because the price quantity relationship stays the same because there's no change in the slope. Right? The price quantity relationship is the same. What's different is where the line is drawn on the graph. Farther out it is, the more you want at any given price. We'll talk in chapter 5, hopefully I'll get to it today, about elasticity, which is a change in the slope of the line. Okay, so we'll get to that shortly. All right, so that's demand shifters. Questions about that? We're all good? All right, supply shifters are similar, but a little more. Remember, I don't want that to be an equal sign. I was trying to emphasize it. I don't want it to be equal. Remember, the supply curve always has a positive slope. Right? It always goes up and to the right. Why does it go up and to the right? Well, the idea is that in order to get more resources brought online, you have to raise the price. We talked about the best way to think about this is how many hours would I be willing to work? Well, if you pay me more, I'm willing to work more hours. That's what that says. Right? I'm willing to do more if you know, whatever you're asking me to do, if I offer you more money. They offer me more money to teach more classes, I teach more classes. Right? But it has to be over and above what they're already paying me. So this is a relationship, remember, between, so let's put numbers to that. So like, let's say it's 2 plus 1/2 Q, right? So it starts at 2 and it goes up at a slope of 1/2. So for every additional dollar, you're going to get 2 more units of quantity. If I go from say 2 to say 4, right? If I want to shift that line now from to D2, D1, let's say at a price of 8, right? In the original sorry, not D, S. What am I doing? S. So S1, S2, under S1 at a price of 8, right? 2 plus 1/2 Q, right? Minus 2, I get 6 equals 1/2 Q. So then I multiply by 2 and I get 12 equals Q. So that's 12. Under S2, if I have a left shift or an up shift of the demand curve, right, where the intercept is now 4, I get at a price of 8, I'm going to get 4 plus 1/2 Q. So 8 minus 4 is 4 times 2 is 8 equals Q. So I wind up getting 8. Why would the demand curve shift to the left or right? Well, usually remember what this kind of boils down to is the cost of producing additional units, right? Or the cost or the price of getting suppliers to bring additional units to the market. So what would cause a left or right shift of the supply curve? Well, number one is technological innovation. What would cause a shift? So what are the supply shifters? So the first one is technological innovation. And this can actually go both ways depending. Good technological innovation results in a lower cost per unit. So could be that we come up with a better way of providing mental health care, for example. And one of the really exciting innovations that's happening right now, and I just published an interview with a mental health innovator, entrepreneur, is text-based mental health, where instead of going to an office and sitting down with your therapist, you bust out your phone, which you have, with you all the time. And you're like, "Hey doc, I'm feeling really bummed out. Just broke up with my girlfriend," and send a text, and then doc, texts you back, a little while later, it says, "Oh, so tell me about that. When did you break up? Oh, blah blah blah." And you're kind of going back and forth. But you can get that service from this company that this guy founded. You can get unlimited text-based mental health care from a therapist, unlimited text-based therapy, for $40 a month. You can text them. It's in business hours, 5 days a week. If you text them on Sunday, they'll answer you by Monday morning. Right? So you can get unlimited access to a therapist on an asynchronous, not simultaneous time. They have a certain number of hours to get back to you and a bunch of parameters. But they have the ability to, so instead of texting your BFF, you're texting somebody who's a trained therapist with whatever it is you're concerned about. And what's interesting about his work is he's a researcher up at Dartmouth, and they've been able to prove that text-based mental health care is as effective or more effective than traditional face-to-face care for most common mental health issues, depression and anxiety, especially those. Works really well because you have access in real time. You're not like storing up. You're not like having a breakdown because you just broke up with your girlfriend or boyfriend, and you got an appointment next week, and you've got to hang on to be able to talk about it. You can do it right then, and you have a response. Yeah, it's not necessarily an instantaneous response, but there are parameters that's got to be reasonably quickly. And the difference is it's $40 a month without insurance. That's it. It's not a copay. And probably if you've gone to therapy or you've had a friend or a relative that's gone to therapy, most therapists today don't take health insurance. They're nope, cash only. And it's anywhere from $150 to $300 an hour, right? If you've got insurance and you're going to, getting therapy, you're probably paying $15 or $20, in copay, and then the insurance company is paying the balance for your therapy. This is $40 a month, period. That's a crazy innovation in terms of a reduction in price. So what they've done is they have it's less. They can do it because it's less expensive for them. So they've been able to shift their supply curve way down, and I would argue it's probably not just down. It's also probably flatter too, as a result of technological innovation. So that's an example of positive technological innovation. But other examples of technological innovation are things like mass production. We've talked about the Ford system of mass production of cars, radically reduced supply and flattened it a lot too. So the cost per unit went more like this. Right? So technological innovation can shift you left, but it can also shift you right, making it less expensive, or down or right, or it can also shift you left or up. That's an example of that. Well, Da Vinci robot, for example, is a big cost. It's I usually say it's $1 million for the robot. I was just talking with a group of physicians a couple of weeks ago, and they're like, "Oh no, yeah, not anymore. It's more like $2 million for the robot." So you got to buy the robot, and then you got to do, and oh, by the way, you're not allowed to bill. The RVUs are the same, right? We looked at the RVUs, right? The RVUs for the procedure that you're doing with the robot are the same. So you've got to absorb that additional cost. So that would be, it's a great technological innovation, but it's going to be a left shift to the supply curve. You're going to have to, the cost of providing that care is higher per unit, right? Than before. You have to find a way to raise prices or do more, one or the other, to cover that up. So technological innovation could go either way in terms of shifting the supply curve. Some reduce the cost of production, some increase the cost of production. Changes in the price of inputs. So these are related. So I'm producing stuff, right? I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I need inputs that I'm going to put into your body: screws, plates, all the good stuff that if you've had, if you've done any real damage to your body, you've probably got some metal in your body, right? That stuff is really expensive, and it only gets more expensive. That's an example of an input. So if there is an overall increase in the price of orthopedic supplies, as an orthopedic surgeon, what's that going to do? That's going to cause a left shift of my supply curve, because I'm not going to be able to do surgery unless I can charge you a higher price. I'm going to incorporate those input prices into my production of surgery. We've seen a massive increase in energy costs over the last year, right? Gas prices went from something like $2.50 a gallon to almost $5.50 a gallon. They're down to what, $3.50 again? They're still higher. Try to name a good or a service that's done without any use of any energy. And the answer is pretty much anything bought in the market is done. It's either transported, it's manufactured, right? Energy goes into everything that we buy. And so when energy prices go up, it's not just, oh, I have to pay more at the gas tank. It's the cost of food goes up. You may have noticed, right? Cost of food goes up. Why does cost of food go up? Well, because most of your fresh vegetables are grown in California or Mexico, and they have to be trucked over to Hannaford so you can go buy them. Oh, trucks run on gas. Gas prices went up. Right? The plows and the combines that are picking your food all run on gas or diesel or something, but they're running on fuel, and that fuel costs have all gone up. They're all using energy of some sort. They're not running on solar. So if price of fuel goes up, that has a way of kind of making its way into the price of pretty much everything. So think about a process, right, that uses some sort of input. I'm going to Dunks and I'm buying my coffee. Well, there's an international market for coffee. If something bad happens in Bolivia and wipes out half the coffee supply, the price of coffee is going to go up. That's an input that Dunks needs to make cups of coffee. They need coffee beans, which they then use to make coffee that I'm going to go buy. Well, if the price of coffee beans goes up, price of my cup of coffee is going to go up too, because the increase in the inputs increases and causes a left or up shift, right? Likewise, if we have a bumper crop of coffee, or paper goes down in price or something like that, then my cup of coffee will go down, or will be a right shift or a downward shift. Okay. Examples of this, like price shocks. You'll hear economists talk about price shocks all the time. That's this kind of idea of inputs. One of my examples here is war in the Middle East, but I just say war in Ukraine, right? War in Ukraine has caused all kinds of price shocks around the world. Ukraine is a breadbasket. They grow some non-trivial percentage of the world's wheat. And then that wheat gets shipped to countries all over the world. Well, some countries are really poor, and can't afford to pay for increased. When the Ukraine's wheat shipments get cut because Russians are blowing up their port cities and trying to sink their ships, and they can't be shipped out, all of a sudden there's less wheat on the international market. That results in a higher price, and people get priced out of that. Another example of inputs: you're running a hospital. What have we said in finance? Maybe I haven't gotten to that yet. Well, I've at least said it. What's the number one cost to running a hospital? Salaries, right? So if salaries go up, right, that's a change in inputs. That's a left shift of the supply curve. What causes salaries to go up? nurses unionize, right? If you're working in a non-union facility, and you're a leader in that facility, the last thing you want is for the nurses to unionize, because they will demand higher salaries, fewer hours, they'll demand more nurses on the floor at any given time. All of those things will drive up your manpower costs, which then is a major, it's half of your cost of running a hospital or more is manpower. So if your nurses go from non-unionized to unionized, you're going to wind up with much higher manpower costs. What's that mean? That's your major input. That's going to be a left shift of your demand curve. And once a union metastasizes in an organization, it almost never goes away. Taxes and subsidies. And we'll do a lot more with taxes and subsidies in chapter 6. Taxes and subsidies, so I'll just very briefly talk about this. But a tax, particularly a per unit tax, like if I charge, but all taxes, if I charge a tax on a supplier for something that they're selling, right? So if I'm like, hey, yeah, we can legalize marijuana, but we're going to tax the hell out of it, right? So you're going to have some price of producing, and then a tax will lay on top of that, and a tax will shift your supply curve up and to the left, right? On the other hand, if I subsidize something, if I offer a subsidy to a producer, so for example, we have enormous subsidies to corn and sugar, sugar beet farmers. So have you guys ever been to, like, say, if you've ever been down to like Mexico, right? And so I lived in, my first duty assignment was in El Paso. You could literally walk, there was a bridge in El Paso, went over the Rio Grande. You could walk across the bridge into Mexico, and you could go like catch a taxi, and you could go shop in the market in downtown Juarez. Juarez now is kind of a scary place to find people, mass graves because of all the gangs down there. So not really a place you go hang out now, which is a real sad thing because we used to really enjoy it. And one of the things you could do is you go across the border into Mexico and you buy a Coke. And Mexican Coke is different than Coke you buy in the United States. Anybody know why? Anybody had the experience drinking of Mexican Coke versus a US Coke? Had you vacation down there or something? So Mexican Coke is made with sugar, like real sugar. What sweetens most of your beverages in the United States? Any canned beverages, any soda, Coke or any other one? No, not the sweetened ones, like Diet Coke. Yeah, that's just nothing but chemicals. Regular Coke is pretty much nothing but chemicals. What's the number one sweetener used in industrial food production in the United States? Corn syrup. Corn syrup. If you pick up almost any liquid in the grocery store, from your sodas, if they're sweetened, to your salad dressings, to one of the ingredients is almost certainly going to be corn syrup. Why corn syrup rather than sugar? Well, for decades now, we have been funding subsidies to corn farmers in the United States. We have also put very significant tariffs on sugar from being imported to the United States. We are a crappy place to grow sugar. We get sugar from sugar beets, which is a really common one, but sugar cane is much better for doing that. Sugar cane grows like a weed, because it is, down in Brazil, and Brazil can make real sugar way cheaper, right? The supply curve for making sugar in Brazil is like down here relative to making sugar in the United States is way up here. It's a lot more expensive to make sugar with sugar beets than it is to make sugar with sugar cane. We have federal policy that taxes the import of foreign sugar, which causes U.S. sugar. Like if you're going to buy real sugar, like the sugar you buy, I mean, we have it. If you're going to go buy a bag of Domino's sugars, you can make cookies. You can buy it. But if we didn't have those tariffs on sugar, on the import of sugar, a bag of sugar would probably be half the cost to you of what it is today. Now, a bag of sugar is like $3, so we don't really fuss about it because it's a relatively small percentage of our personal budgets. We'll talk about that in probably, I guess it'll be now Wednesday when we talk about the elasticity of demand. We're relatively indifferent. When I tell you, you got to buy, you could buy 5 pounds of sugar for $3 or $4, and that's going to last you for a couple of months unless you bake all the time. You're gonna be like, whatever, it's $3 or $1.50. It doesn't really impact my budget all that much. So I'm not gonna pay much attention to it, which is why the sugar farmers in the United States have been able to get away with having that policy in place for decades. But companies like Coca-Cola, right, or Pepsi, or any other company that makes packaged goods that you buy all the time in the grocery store, use tons of sweeteners. And sugar is much, much more expensive than corn syrup, because while we tax foreign imports of sugar and make sugar more expensive in the United States, we subsidize the production of corn in the United States so that corn syrup becomes, so there's all this corn. What can we do with it? Well, we can feed it to animals, which we do. People can eat it, or we can process it into corn syrup, which then gets put into all the sugary drinks and sweeteners. And that is a kind of a public health problem. Part of the reason why we are as a society, so overweight is we've seen this cheapening of this sweetener ingredient, corn syrup. And so because of the subsidies, the production cost of corn syrup has shifted down, so that companies like Coke are like, I'm not buying sugar in the United States. That's really expensive. I'm going to buy corn syrup instead. So that's why you see corn syrup. Next time you go to the grocery store and you're buying your stuff, look at some of the ingredients and see how many of the things that you have corn syrup in. All right, I've got 2 minutes and I'm going to try to wrap this up so we can move on. Expectations, same idea as what we talked about with demand. If I think that things are going to get more expensive in the future, and I'm a supplier, if I'm making defibrillators, or I'm making any sort of medical device, and I think that there's going to be a regulation passed that allows me to charge a higher price, I think that there's going to be a new subsidy passed by the government that increases the number of people with health insurance. Well, that means that they're going to be able to pay more for my product. What will I do if I have an inventory of stuff today and I can sell it for $10 today? Or I think that if I just wait a month or 6 months, that I'd be able to sell those products instead of $10, I'll sell it for $20. What will I do with the inventory that I have today? Will I sell it today? I'll hold on to it today, right? And so that shifts the supply curve up. If you want to buy from me today, because I expect that I'll be able to get $20 in 6 months, you're probably going to have to pay me $18 instead of $10, right? Maybe not 20, but something close to 20, because I think that in the future I'll be able to sell it for 20. So it shifts my cost today up and my future cost down. And the last one is entry and exit. As more firms enter the market, so we're looking at a market level demand. As more dentist offices entered the Cibolo market that I was talking about a minute ago, the existing dentists had to bring their costs down in order to be able to survive. So those are the major shifters. So that finishes off 4, so we're now officially a whole day behind. So we'll do 5 and get into 6 next time.
So, to like wrap it up, I have like, with the time working with it, right? So I want my supply curve to go down instead of up, so we can get more content.
Um,
Thank you.
Not necessarily, right? It's the combination of the demand and supply that determines what your profit is, as well as the elasticity, which is what we'll talk about next
Okay,
time.
all right, thank you.
That's the angle, the slope of your curve.
Right, okay.
All right, see you. See you. Yes, ma'am.
So, first thing my hands, like the bed.
Yep.
That's like the day I'm supposed to be out. Can I take the exam the day before?
You can take it after. I don't give it before.
You don't do it before.
And I do that because one person can let out, that I'm thinking you would, but like one person could like expose all the answers to everybody. Whereas if I have you take it afterwards, it's just you. You can expose it to you, but like that's just one person, not the whole
Okay.
class.
Or, cause like I don't wanna like be stressed the next day, like catching up, like depending on what time I come back, I take it later in the day Wednesday, if I'm back by like 3 or 4.
Yeah, probably.
I'll let you know.
Let's talk about it.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
I'll need to look at the days and see what I've got going on.